What if we told you that humanity is being driven to the brink of extinction by an illness? That all the poverty, the climate devastation, the perpetual war and consumption fetishism we see all around us have roots in a mass psychological infection. In his book, Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World, Paul Levy argues that all of humanity is under the grasp of a psychological illness. Wetiko. Wetiko is a term used in Native American spirituality to describe a contagious psycho-spiritual disease of the soul and a parasite of the mind. In his book, Levy argues that the concept of Wetiko is present not just among the Native Americans, but in several spiritual traditions, including Kabbalah, Vedanta, and even the psychology of Carl Jung. He writes, Wetiko is a cannibalizing force driven by insatiable greed, appetite without satisfaction, consumption as an end in itself, and war for its own sake against other tribes, species, nature, and even the individual's own humanity. It is a disease of the soul, and being a disease of the soul, we all potentially have Wetiko, as it pervades and informs the underlying field of consciousness. Any one of us, at any moment, can fall into our unconscious and unwittingly become an instrument for the evil of Wetiko to act itself out through us and incarnate in our world. If we see someone who seems to be taken over by Wetiko, and we think they have the disease and we don't, in seeing them as separate, we have fallen under the spell of the virus ourselves. In this video, we will do a deep dive into the concept of Wetiko and how we can prevent ourselves from being infected by this mind virus. Later in this video, we will also talk about how Wetiko was perceived by the great Indian mystic, Sri Aurobindo. We can understand Wetiko better by looking at the context of its origins. During the conquest of America, the subjugated native population believed that Wetiko was a disease that the white man had brought with him. The indigenous author Jack Forbes, who wrote the classic book about Wetiko, Columbus and Other Cannibals, referred to Wetiko as the sickness of exploitation. While Wetiko, as a mind virus, operates within the human psyche, it also operates in the outside world through the constant desire for acquisition, which was present within the early conquerors of America and continues in all capitalist societies today. The indigenous author Eduardo Duran writes about how the concept of Wetiko arose among the native population in his book, Healing the Soul Wound. The colonial process experienced by these people can be described as a collective raping process of the psyche of both the land and the people. In essence, the vampire or Wetiko bit the world, and the infection of the poison injected by the vampire has not been eradicated. Later in this video, we will discuss how the prevalence of depression in the modern world is also an example of Wetiko. The Kabbalah refers to a set of esoteric practices within Judaism. The Kabbalah has its own set of sacred texts which are supposed to explain the esoteric meaning of the Hebrew Bible. Levy argues in his book that the 16th century Jewish mystic Isaac Luria, who is seen as the father of the contemporary Kabbalah, recognized Wetiko in his writings. In Luria's writings, we see a creation story that conforms to the central idea of Wetiko, that it is an evil which was necessary for the creation of the world, but one that must also be overcome for spiritual evolution. The story goes like this. According to the Kabbalah, when it first arose within the divine will to create a universe, God poured His infinite light into vessels that He had prepared for this event. But the vessels were instantaneously filled and shattered by this influx of divine light. This catastrophic event, called the breaking of the vessels, shattered the vessels into shards. each shard now trapped a portion of the divine light, seemingly separating these fragments of divine light from their source. These shards, known as the kelipot, were like shells that imprisoned within themselves the divine light of God, which, because of their estrangement from their source, turned malevolent, becoming the source of evil and personal suffering. The kelipot, therefore, are a symbol of all the evil in the world, even though their source is the divine light itself. And so, Levy writes, summarizing the moral of this creation story. Evil, which by definition is diametrically opposed to good, is paradoxically at the same time its very source. Evil has no life of its own. The very source of evil is the divine light. Though parasitically dependent upon the light of God, evil seeks to destroy holiness, which is to ultimately destroy everything, including itself. Importantly, however, the Kabbalah maintains that the breaking of the vessels was necessary, that evil was necessary and built into the very design of the universe. In the process of creation, God or the self becomes alienated from itself, but God had to become estranged from himself in order to, in the future, become more fully himself. Psychologically, this means that the individual ego, if it has to undergo transformation towards a higher spiritual reality, must be wounded or broken in some way in order to open up to the healing energies of the unconscious. This is because, according to the Cabala, a sinner who repents is on a higher level than the saint who has never sinned. The Russian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev shared this view when he said, "The good which has triumphed over evil is superior to the good which preceded it." Wetiko is this same necessary evil which holds us back in our spiritual development, and it is only by overcoming Wetiko that we can reach a higher spiritual reality. Despite all your efforts towards progress, there may be times where one experiences setbacks, with bouts of depression holding us back. In such situations, Levy argues, we should recognize the role of Wetiko and its negative energies holding us back. One example of such a spiritual downfall is the dark night of the soul, an experience recounted by several Christian mythics who go through periods of doubt and a lack of spiritual zeal. The dark night is an inner psychological experience that involves feeling disconnected from the light and the source of life and descending into the darkness. But, Levy writes, it is only by going through these periods of darkness and even recognizing their necessity in our spiritual evolution that the light can be rediscovered in a deeper way. This is the state of melancholia, which is a healthy response to encountering our own darkness. Levy even argues that one should not medicate away melancholia with pills like antidepressants, which would prevent us from fully going through the natural process of the dark night. Just like the Kabbalah, Levy argues that even the great Indian mystic, Sri Aurobindo, referred to Wetiko without using that term for it. Instead, Sri Aurobindo constantly referred to the hostile forces which could cause the downfall of a spiritual practitioner. In his letters on yoga, Sri Aurobindo cautioned his followers, "The hostile forces are powers of darkness who are in revolt against the light and the truth and want to keep this world under their rule in darkness and ignorance. Whenever anyone wants to reach the truth, to realize the divine, they stand in the way as much as possible. So they always try to destroy the work as a whole and to spoil the sadhana or spiritual practice of each sadhak or practitioner. They oppose the divine intention and the evolutionary purpose in the human being." Shockingly, Sri Aurobindo even went into great detail about the strategy of the hostile forces and how they bring about our downfall. He wrote, "Their way of testing is to take advantage of any point of weakness and push with all their force at that point to break down the sadhana. The first thing the attack does is to try to cloud the mind's intelligence. Then they create a great depression, discouragement, despair. That is their favorite weapon. They put in suggestions to the mind so as to make it also accept the disturbance. This should alert us to a few symptoms of Wetiko taking over us. Brain fog, depression, and doubt about spiritual truths can all be understood as the arrival of the hostile forces within our psyche. Sri Aurobindo's spiritual collaborator, Mira Alfasa, known simply as the Mother, also cautioned her followers about these hostile forces. She explained, their method is to try first to cast their influence upon a man. Then they enter slowly into his atmosphere and in the end may get complete possession of him, driving out entirely the real human soul and personality. These creatures, when in possession of an earthly body, may have the human appearance, but they have not a human nature. Their habit is to draw upon the life force of human beings. They attack and capture vital power wherever they can and feed upon it. This leads Levy to the conclusion that a person completely taken over by Wetiko is not a real human being, but a vampire. They appear as humans, but are actually evil beings that take away our vital and precious life force by creating depression within us. But how can we fight these forces? Levy cautions us. One of the major ways the hostile forces work is to get us to unconsciously identify with their version of who we are. They seduce us to become overwhelmed, depressed, filled with despair and pessimism in a world seemingly going to hell in a handbasket. It is not just helpful, but crucial to recognize the attack from the hostile forces as something foreign coming from outside of ourselves, that is, other than ourselves, and hence false to our true being. So, we must always recognize, whenever we go through depression or experience negative energies of any kind, that those energies are not us. They are outside, hostile forces attacking our spiritual development. Sri Aurobindo writes, the concentration in the heart is the way to get rid of them, but there must also be a detachment of the consciousness so that it can stand back from the attack and feel separate from it. We must always remember that the light of the self or God is always with us. This presence is available even in its seeming absence, even when we are completely under the grasp of Wetiko. As Levy eloquently writes, even on the cloudiest of days the sun is in the sky radiantly shining, its light merely temporarily obscured. One way of conceiving of spiritual practice is that it dispels the clouds that obscure our light, so that we can just let our light naturally shine. Even thinking that we are a separate self, disconnected from other individuals and from nature, is a part of Wetiko. Levy, in his book, highlights that another name for Wetiko is me disease. Conceiving of ourselves as a separate, disconnected self is Wetiko's main act. It is this separation from all which creates isolation and depression within us. Recognizing the purpose of Wetiko, but then also overcoming it, is the only thing that can reconnect us with our spiritual selves. For this, we must first get rid of our vain desires. Humanity's insatiability is, according to Carl Jung, the sickness of Western man, and he will not rest until he has infected the whole world with his own greedy restlessness. Today, greed, with its origins in the ego and Wetiko, is the foundation of our modern societies. We must, therefore, find a way to keep living in this world without being affected by Wetiko at both the individual as well as the societal level. Do you believe that you have ever experienced Wetiko? Share your experience with us in the comments below.